We got 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I see my watch.
Cool.
All right. Welcome to Shot Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, where should we start? You're in your lame duck couple months, and you can burn it all down. Luke tells all. Where do you want to start at?
I don't know. I mean, like, there's a lot of corners where you can burn things down from, and so I don't know. I didn't come in here with a plan, but I'm gonna try to be as open book as reasonable.
Right.
So I mean, just fire away.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we'll start with where do you think the city's major blind spots are that you really plugged in? That's gonna be you feel like gonna be missing.
I don't know. I mean, I obviously had a pretty strong connection to the nonprofit sector, having worked at Sea Haven for 5 years. And still, I'd say most of my friend group operates within that realm. And I think having worked in that area and still maintaining contact with those people really gives you an insight, not necessarily a super deep one, into the realities of a lot of the people that can't attend council meetings because they're working.
Right.
And ultimately they are the people that make our economy run.
Right.
And so,
Do you think that this is why I kind of want to talk to you about a term I've heard thrown around is the NOAP's nonprofit industrial complex.
Yeah.
Which I think is funny. And also, government is many things. And one of the things it is a nonprofit, and not everything's necessarily about money.
Yeah.
Government isn't run like a business. It loses money. It's not supposed to make money.
Yeah.
In the dynamics of that. So I just wanted your opinion. What do you say? What do you say to that idea of there's this nonprofit industrial complex in Moab?
I don't know. Obviously that brings to mind the concept of the military industrial complex, which to me that generally means this industry group that really tries to manipulate situations or political figureheads towards some sort of self-serving agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I think just as any sort of business entity, nonprofits need to do what they need to do to survive. But one of the things that I always joked about with a lot of people in the nonprofit sector is, particularly in the service-based ones that really permeate this community, is everybody's goal should be to work themselves out of a job. Mm-hmm. At Sea Haven, if we could solve domestic violence, I'd be glad to not have a job at that point. And I don't know that that's really the case with what that term connotes.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that term used to be you start having nonprofits, just attracts more, and then all of a sudden your town's overrun with hippies. That is the context that I've heard it in. And I see it's nonprofits are doing the things that government shouldn't do, or not shouldn't do, that can't do.
Yeah.
And that they're
or do it more effectively.
Right.
That was a big thing when I came into city council is, I don't know, in larger cities, maybe government entities would provide some of the services that are being provided by nonprofits, but ultimately it made a lot more sense for the city to more targetedly direct funding to certain nonprofits, so that they have much more consistency in their budgeting process rather than having to go through kind of that with the big community grants, where there was a lot of uncertainty as to how much they would get, and that makes things more difficult. And ultimately that doesn't require the city to hire on people, take on more liability long term, while also leveraging local expertise. So ultimately that money is going to be used a lot more effectively. You have people who already have the pre-existing relationships, have an understanding of how the systems that they navigate work. It's just going to be such a much better use of money. And I can see where people, by looking at who's employed like in a lot of these nonprofits would be like, oh, it's a bunch of hippies. But at the end of the day, these nonprofits are taking care of community members. They are taking care of community members whose families have been here for generations. And like, quite frankly, like I don't always, like when I was at Seek Haven, I didn't see a lot of locals applying for jobs there. It's not like we were being exclusive or anything like that, or that we were having some sort of like headhunting company going around the country trying to find like the dirtiest hippie that we could find to like bring into the community. No, we were looking for people who like really wanted, like felt a really strong connection to the community of Moab and wanted to contribute to it in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So I kind of want to dive into, there's this, to me, government is like usually staffed by two types of people, right? There's like the business person, or there's like the community organizer and activist. And you, like, I would think that you would be more on that community organizer activist. Well, I kind of want to, like, you know, you're talking about the business of the business community and the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the like, how do you see the magic sauce of Moab all work? We have this economy, but it also has winners and losers.
Yeah.
And so I think about like the negative effects of our economy. We have these nonprofits kind of like working to offset those effects. And so there's like this push-pull dynamic on it. Just kind of where do you see the economy and like what the economy of Moab and like that nonprofit? There's that push-pull dynamic. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. And I think like that is a thing to a certain degree. I think like the one thing that I would caution people a lot is we have a propensity of creating false binaries where it's one or the other, like this or that. Like things are multitudes, like especially in things as complex as an economy. Like things are going to be interrelated in a lot of ways that we can't even foresee. But like there is like a little bit of like a chicken and the egg situation, I think, where is the fact that we have such a robust like nonprofit scene potentially promoting like helping promote businesses like not like fully taking care of their employees because like those needs are being met elsewhere.
right.
Or
I thought it was interesting. There was a thing where Tanya was talking about the Moab Health Clinic,
mm-hmm.
and she was like, "Oh, so you're just like these like are we just subsidizing hotels that should be paying a higher wage?" And it was like a good moment where it was like, yeah, you know.
Well, it's like I don't know if this is like still the case, but I remember at one point like McDonald's like offered some sort of like budget management like course to its employees, like, and one of the sections like literally like walked them through how to apply for like SNAP benefits and stuff like that. Yeah. And so like in order to be able to like live sustainably, a part of McDonald's business model was to like guide its employees to like federal benefits. Right. And so like they've baked that into their like business model.
Yeah, which is, you know, bonkers.
Yeah.
In some ways, you commend them. Be like, yeah, like, good. Help your employees
yeah.
out. But then you're like, well, you know, shouldn't you pay enough? But, you know, what's enough?
Yeah.
You know, maybe you have 8 kids. And not many jobs are going to pay for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, anyways. Yeah, I just, you know, I don't really follow a lot of city politics. I'm more of like a county politics guy. And so you're leaving. First of all, why'd you, like, what brought you to Moab? Was it the Seek Haven job? Or what was that?
Not, like, yes and no. So I just kind of, like, started stagnating in Chicago.
Okay.
And my mom and her now husband moved out here like a year and a half, 2 years before I did. Like I hadn't even really heard of Moab until like my mom came to visit out here, and I came to visit and like really liked the appeal of it. And I'd always been interested in living somewhere out west, and Moab felt like a pretty good centrally like located area to explore the West. And it was a couple of months before I moved out here that my mom kind of gave me a heads up about the Sea Haven job. And that kind of like fell within my realm. I have like a psychology background, and prior to moving out here, I was working at a drop-in center on the south side of Chicago for people with severe persistent mental illnesses that were transitioning out of like institutionalized living into independent living. And I did that for like 3.5 years. So like, I mean, that was a culture shock to me, like having primarily grown up in like a middle class, like suburbia, to like being on the south side.
Next to a big urban
Yeah.
area,
Well, and then just like seeing like going to work every day in like the big part of the urban area that like people who have the same background as me generally like do everything they can to avoid. And so it kind of like, I don't know, it was a very enlightening experience. It was a sad experience, like seeing what a lot of people's day to day is that I think most society is really kind of blind to. And I mean, that was something that carried over into Sea Haven, but in a lot of time, like kind of similarly in both of those jobs, I really had the opportunity to engage with people in a meaningful way and potentially model healthy relationships that they might not really have as accessible to their lives as we would hope. But yeah, I mean, so like,
So you talk a lot about what you gain on experiences, like, so this city council thing,
yeah,
like, what are you walking away with?
a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I don't want to say realistic. I feel like I'm walking.
I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
you're good.
I have to turn this off. Oh my god. What a bad house. So,
You're
first
good.
off, what now?
No, honestly, I think it like has made me a little bit more pragmatic, which is like, I don't know, kind of like killed some of the like the joie de vivre, like the joy and like kind of like the mysticism of like the possibilities that come with like a certain amount of like ignorance. And I know ignorance is kind of like has one not the greatest connotations, but it was just one of those like, I want to address this, and this.
I'm going to be King Luke and solve the problems of Moab.
Definitely not King Luke,
Well,
but yeah.
you know, like,
But like, it's like, hey, I'm going to be able to leverage my experience, like by seeing all of these shortcomings in the community that are having like a direct impact and like potentially allowing Sea Haven's clients from being able to get out of really unhealthy relationships. And I don't know, you kind of go in there and you start understanding that there are roles that government should play and there are roles that it really should kind of stay out of. Like, I think we learned that with Walnut Lane, where, and that's kind of just been a reality of working in government, is that the wheels of government turn slowly. And so as an entity, even like a small city government isn't quite as nimble to be able to react quickly and effectively to like changing dynamics in like the market, for example. Like that was a big thing with Walnut Lane, is like, had the pandemic not happened, I think Walnut Lane would have worked out like as envisioned. But the pandemic did happen, and because there are so many other moving pieces that the city needs to manage, like when something falls that far off the rails, like it kind of falls out of sight too. And that frequently happens at the expense of people. I will say that during that time, while the city was the landlord, they did work a lot in terms of trying to upgrade people's living circumstances, because a lot of them really were inhospitable.
I worked on many of them. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, these are bad conditions. Like, do you have cardboard for a window?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, no, we
you
heard
have a tarp on your roof. That,
weird stories of people running gas through hoses that were running across like their kitchen room floors to their like oven or to their range. And So just like really unsafe and that's ultimately like what was kind of like the death blow to the Walnut Lane situation, is that our insurance company would no longer insure Walnut Lane because it was such a liability. And so we found that out with a couple of months left to go before like the policy ended. And like our insurance broker was like helping us, like trying to shop this around to like other insurance companies to see if any, like literally nobody would cover Walnut Lane. And like, had we not made the really, I didn't like, I mean, I don't know, it sucks. Like that, I think that's going to be one of the things that really sticks with me the longest is I worked with,
like you let
yeah,
people down.
like
You were kind of like, well, that's not government's responsibility.
but we took it on ourselves,
Well,
and
no,
so it
the
became,
question
yeah.
is it just not our government? Like, is it because the structure is so like, it is what it is, but like a strong central authority could be, like a strong central planning entity. The Chinese make public housing available, and there's no homeless problem in China, right? With a strong central, like, I'm just wondering, is it the messiness of American democracy, and is there so loud voices? What I hear loud is like, see, this is proof that we cannot interfere with the market. And I was like, well, do we have the tools to interfere with the market?
I don't want to say like never. I think it can be effectively run. I think like one of the more like the greater difficulties with government is there isn't necessarily the same level of stability as there is with other institutions, particularly, I guess, in a democratic system where there is like a constant like churning of the leadership. And so like there's going to be a constant shifting of priorities. And I think like what makes it a little difficult too is like you have like a housing oriented like entity, whether it be like Hasu or Mackled or like a private developer or something, like that is all they focus on, and like that is all that they direct all of their attention to. That is where they develop all of their expertise, and like they are in tune with what is happening in that. Like, but when you're managing like sewer, water, like taxation, like all of these other things,
Oh, that explains it really well, because I always was like, why don't we enter those realms? And I think the structure of it is like, you need Xi Jinping's 200-year plan. Maybe that's or an entity that is what you're saying is focused on a long-term mission.
Yeah, and that's ultimately like I think what we were trying to find that hybrid of when we were trying to go the public-private partnership, like the triple P, where like we would work with a developer who does have the expertise, who has the staffing, the business relationships and everything like that, and eventually like hand that over to them. And once again, like we also have to be conscious that we ultimately have a limited like revenue base. And so we have to decide like where we want to like set up long-term financial liabilities. And so if we wanted to be the landlord, then we would have to like create a position that oversees that like we'd have to like dedicate more maintenance people towards that. And at that point, like, how does that impact the rents that we're potentially charging there? Like, if we don't want to increase rents, then are we having the community subsidize like that part of the community even more so? And so I think a part of it is trying to be diligent with like taxpayer funds, and like recognizing that although I remember being interviewed on KZMU. Walnut Lane was absolutely like a black eye for the city, but I think it was a black eye that the city should have worn proudly, because it was like a really terrible circumstance that those people like found themselves in. Like, yeah, the city probably could have done like some more due diligence, but it was an emergency situation, and sometimes you don't have like the time to be able to like dig into things as much as you would like to, particularly when there is literal human suffering involved. And
black eye they should have worn proudly. That's interesting. Yeah, because the idea was like, oh, this was going to just sell to like a commercial developer, correct?
that was the concern.
Yeah.
Because that's like in a lot of ways like that is what we're seeing happening across the market, whether it be like in commercial zones or even in residential zones. Like, and like, that's another thing that I walked away from with city council is I think I will say a much more realistic picture of like the power that local government actually has in terms of like pushing housing development. Like there are certain things that we can do. We are constrained a lot by state level government, but like at the end of the day, right now, like the biggest like influencer is just the market at large, and people want to maximize their like profit margins or their profitability, and so like when there wasn't any sort of regulation against overnight accommodations, like
All the money's going to go towards
the thing that makes the most money that got like kind of 86th. And so like now what we're seeing is the luxury second homes, like because that is the next most profitable thing. And so like people just keep going to what is the next most profitable thing. There are incentives that I think the city and the county are headed a lot more in that direction now of trying to offer incentives to try to bring in and promote some more housing that can better address a lot of the deficits that our local residents are facing. But at the end of the day, like everybody is still competing within that market. And Moab is different in a lot of ways where I think it's hard for us to grow ourselves out of these deficits, because we're not just dealing with like a local population. In a lot of ways, we are dealing with an international population because we do have like foreign nationals who like come here, love it, and want to buy a property. And so the degree of competition, I think, is significantly greater than in a lot of markets that you would see in a similarly like sized town. And like these are people who can afford to travel internationally. Like they're going to have more money as a base. And so it's a challenging position for our locals to find themselves in, and it is. I mean, there is a tidal wave of kind of outside influence, whether it be like private interests or like business interests or anything like that. In a lot of ways, it felt like there is a tsunami coming. We cannot stop this tsunami, but like, where can we put like breaks or dams to maybe just like hold the water back a little bit so that we can allow people to like build up some infrastructure in the meantime, before the water comes. But like there's nothing you can do to stop the water from coming.
Right.
And so like
I've often thought that Moab feels like a community under siege.
yeah,
You know, and it's unfortunate because it's like I don't think tourists don't benefit from it.
no.
But
Well, and like what's really disheartening is I think there is to a certain degree some value in being able to view it from that perspective. Like I think that we're under siege.
yeah.
Like because one of the things that I heard the most frequently when I was canvassing was just this pervasive sense that like the sense of community was being eroded away in Moab. And a lot of people were attributing that to tourism, and then like I think that absolutely like plays a part in it. But it's like that weird double-edged sword of like this is the thing that sustains us that is also kind of like killing us. But what I think like really is somewhat disheartening is amidst the chaos that arises from that, there has been a lot of turning against one another within the community where well, it's just you see a lot of like the infighting that it's happening. Like I know it's overrepresented on Facebook, but it does but it kind of, I mean, it matriculates into like day-to-day relationships, and it I don't know, it's one of those things where sometimes having a common enemy can really like be used to like bring people together. And although like, I don't know, we did like the visioning study for the city, tourism was like identified by like 80+% of people as like an issue in like one form or another. And so there,
80%.
yeah.
I mean,
And so it's like we have these like extremely unifying things, but then like we go out of our ways to like divide ourselves and find reasons as to why we're different, and like we start impugning one another's actions with some sort of like subversive motives, rather than like I just have a different approach to this, and like ultimately that really taints and tarnishes the quality of conversation that we can have in the community. Because
you felt what was corrosive to you?
I mean, just like
What was the actual mechanism?
to me,
Social media, or
I mean, I have issues with social media as a whole on just like a broad level.
right?
I think it is in theory like a really great tool, but we're just not capable of like wielding it effectively.
Right. I'm just always interested in what the public squares are.
Yeah.
I find things like we're not a Twitter community.
No.
Right? It's funny, like no one's on
Yeah.
that I know of. I hear. I mean, it kind of is, but you know, but Facebook is the battleground.
It is.
And you feel like that was a really divisive.
I think partly because of how divisive things have gotten, and not just divisive, but off the rails, where like people are just not trying to listen to one another and have dialogue. They are trying to like bolster their side or try to injure the other side, that it has pushed a lot of people out of the conversation. And so what we're seeing isn't an accurate representation of a lot of the sentiment in the community. And I think like, I mean, it's like we've we've manufactured an unnecessary like battle zone. And so like how many people are going to want to step into like an active battle zone? Like I think it's going to push people away when like these are times where we really should be trying to do things to like come together. And ultimately like it's difficult when we're not willing to listen to one another or to like absorb information that might potentially push against like some sort of presupposed beliefs or whatever. I don't know, like one of my common refrains is like, it is hard to have a meaningful conversation when you can't agree upon like the basic facts at the center of the conversation. Like, because we can't agree what we're even talking about, then like, how are we going to be able to move anywhere in some sort of productive direction?
Yeah, and I'll take that as a thing to reload our thing. All right, man. So that was a great thing you were saying about, you were given these unifying factors, or you were talking about devices.
Yeah.
And unifying things. How did you deal with that? You know, did you feel like there was these divisive things coming at you? Or?
I mean, absolutely. Like, I mean, I was at the center of like being accused of like, because of who I'm married to, that I'm like one of Sua's puppets. Like, and like, I literally asked people to like point to anything that I have done in an official capacity as a council member that would like kind of support that notion. And the response that I got was, well, just because you haven't done anything yet doesn't mean that you won't do something in the future. Like, and so like we put people in these situations that are unwinnable. Like, I mean, it was kind of like Emily Campbell when she was being accused of like being an agent of like the Rural Utah Project. Like, and like she wasn't. Like, but people were asking her to prove it. But how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that nothing exists? Like, it's an impossibility that like people are asking of one another. And I think a lot of that's fostered in like, this is somebody who has a different background than me, that has like a different approach or perspective on things from me. And particularly because of like social media and like all the algorithmically like fed information that we receive, we have just kind of like tribalized ourselves. And so like we forget that Moab can be a tribe. Like, we don't need to like fracture ourselves internally. Because like ultimately like that makes us weaker. Like, I mean, if we kind of go with like the flood analogy, or like even the siege analogy, like if we can have like a continuously strong wall around, like that keeps like a lot of those outside forces from coming in. But if we have fractures everywhere, then like it's almost like white, like regardless of how strong parts of the wall are, it doesn't really mean much.
And we kind of have, to me, it's like tourism. It's like a thing we need to harness, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, what do beach towns do with the tsunamis? You know, it's like, well, you know, you don't build in certain areas.
Yeah.
You get your surfboard out in some days.
Yeah.
You know, I just see it as this massive amount of money that comes through the town, and it doesn't raise all boats necessarily.
Oh, absolutely not.
You know, in fact, it pokes holes in some people's boats. So, you know, I just wanted to, how do you view, like, this, you were setting that stuff up for the city to manage?
Can you like?
Well, you know, like the city has this capacity. You know, you're talking about zoning. And one of the
Yeah.
things I thought was interesting with Mulberry Lane, like, I'm of the mind that we actually need commercial zoning.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because it's like, you know, people, there's a big upswing in like home occupation businesses.
Yeah.
And it's like, and here we have a project that was zoned for commercial, you know, but we were protecting it for residential. But like, it's like a smart growth strategy, right? You know, like maybe we don't need more hotels. I mean, if I was a hotel owner, I'd be loving the hotel moratorium. I'm like, sweet.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, it's how to build your economy and society. And I feel like you were there building it. How do you think that your legacy, what your projects were doing? What do you say about that?
Yeah. I think I'd like push back a little bit on like I was there building it. Like I'm not the one that is designing, determining projects and all of that. What we were trying to do is we were trying to identify ways in which we can make some projects that address needs within the community more feasible or have a fighting chance in the market.
Right.
And I think like that there are things that can be done. And
You're talking like land use
yeah,
at that point.
yeah, definitely like land use stuff. I think there is place for, I mean, kind of like how you're talking about like harnessing things. Like I feel like it's a little bit late to the game in terms of how this fund is being used, but I think the framework of the idea has some legs to it where we're talking about the Wahoo Fund at the city. Like if that could potentially be used in some sort of more sustainable way where like the city can give out like low interest or like no interest loans or something to projects that specifically like support the development of affordable housing. Like that falls in line with like what the entire fund was set up for, but we're not just like doling it out in like chunks here and there, never to be seen again. I think the way, but those are funds and like fees basically that are getting extracted from these big money interests because they're not going to put that money in themselves to address the issues that they're creating. But like,
it's not their job accordingly, right? You know, you could say their corporate mission.
Yeah.
They don't have a triple bottom line. We don't require them to. Kind of thing.
And I think like that to a certain degree is the difference between operating at like a government level and sometimes at a business level, particularly like when you think about the multinational corporations where a lot of like the C-suite, like it's about their kind of like bonus incentives that are like 3-5 years out rather than like, hey, I need to sustain this community for the next 100 years. Right. Where like, hey, like I might, like by laying all these people off, like I might really like increase my profit margins and that's going to look great for my like investors and like my stock's going to do great. And so I'm going to get like this really fat bonus, but like how many issues have I like created that are going to need to be like plugged up along the way? And then like it kind of goes back to what I had mentioned earlier is just the interconnectedness of everything is like things don't happen in a vacuum. And that's why like, yeah, I think like there is reason sometimes for government to step in a way that is really going to advantage certain individuals. Um, like whether it be with like overnight accommodations, or if we wanted to like stop a certain type of business from like continuing to grow, is like, yes, right now, um, like that might be one of the most like profitable like ventures to get into, but eventually, like I think there is a lag sometimes between like everything coming online and just how much that competition really impacts like all of the other pre-existing businesses. Like, but in the meantime, we have very limited commercial space, as you had alluded to. And so like we have taken away opportunities for some sort of business that can actually like address year-round needs of the community away. And so like, yes, if we put a moratorium on like a certain type of business, whoever is already established in there, like they're like,
Oh, they're creating monopoly.
yeah, they're crushing it. Like, and, but like, yes, we are king making certain individuals like with those types of actions, but it's with the attempt of preserving space to like allow other types of like businesses to come in that can actually serve the needs of the community. Because there is like, I don't know, I've it is, and like, and that's why I think just having like broad sweeping legislation, like, it's not the way to go about it. I can't remember if this is the term, but it was, I think, like my first year of council, I was researching a lot of this stuff, and it was something called like guerrilla urbanism, where you basically just like set up these little experiments around the community. And you see what works and what doesn't work. And if something isn't working, like, is this something that can be tweaked or fixed a little bit? Like, or is this like clearly just like dead in the water? And so like that way you're not as vesting as much resources, whether it be staff time, whether it be financial resources, whether it be like space. And you eventually find out what's working. And like, once you get something that's actually viable, you expand it out to that broader level. No, I mean it's difficult. I mean, like that's kind of what we were trying to do with a lot of the development agreements. Like when we were developing the AEH, is like the AEH came out of
Which stands for
the active employed households, early, yeah, and so yeah, it was through those development agreements that we kind of started working out the framework of what something like that might look like. Because it was one of the tools that we are allowed to use by the state. But like we were also being like hyper cautious about it, because we know that the state, like when it takes something away, it doesn't come in with like a surgical scalpel and like finally cuts out like, no, we don't want you to do this. Like they come and take like a butcher's knife to it. And like when they do that, they take that power away from everybody else in the state. And so like we were very careful that like this wasn't an affordability thing or anything. It was an attainability thing, where it's just like, can locals even get their foot in the door? Can they even like try to compete in the market before, rather than just getting swallowed up by the market? And so it is like now we're having like numerous projects come online that do like fall under the AEH, and so they are designated to have a third of their units like reserved for people who are actively employed within Grand County. And so I think, but like with that came incentives. It's like, hey, if you do this, like we'll allow you to add some more height, we'll reduce parking restrictions. I think kind of the state does not like us to use sticks. They prefer us to use carrots. And ultimately, I think we'd rather use carrots too. Like you attract a lot more like with honey than you do with like, and so I think those types of approaches, and I think that mentality is something that can be beneficial. And like, that's where kind of tying it back to leveraging local expertise is like, we have people who are working to address the many needs of this community. And so like partnering alongside them, where you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from people who like know and understand, but frankly, a lot of times deal with very limited resources. And like, I mean, sometimes even having like the city sign on as like sign up for for a grant on behalf of an entity, like where ultimately it gets passed through down to the entity and the entity's responsible for everything. But having the city like being on the name of it can give that grant a little bit more of a chance at like actually being awarded. And I mean, like, that's something that we did when I ran. Like, I was pushing for like a grant writer at the city, and like we have one. And I mean, I can't remember which year it was, but we brought in $25 million worth of grant funds with $5 million worth of like city matching funds. And so, I mean, like, that's a 5-to-1 like return on investment.
Big leverage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so much. I feel like we should pat ourselves on the back. It's not a done project, but Moab and the county have both taken a lot of steps for affordable housing.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. I view like that as kind of like such a basis.
Yeah.
Hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely.
Shelters, number one. Right?
Yeah.
What's some other things you think, like looking at that hierarchy of needs? I mean, you deal with a lot of like, you're in the free health clinic, right? Still?
No, so I worked at the hospital. So I left Sea Haven to, so I was like the grant finance manager at the hospital when the hospital was awarded that grant to open up the recovery clinic.
Yeah.
And so I helped manage that for a couple of years. And then once that was kind of up and running, I got moved into the finance department. But I'm currently working at Synergy now. So this is my first foray back into the private sector since like 2011 or something, 2012.
There's a lot of public servants to Synergy.
Yeah. But I also feel like Synergy does a pretty good job of like contributing back.
That's your job, man.
Yeah.
Nothing,
Yeah.
nothing against that. So you've had, this jump from private sector, free market. And like now that you're stepping down from city council, are you full-time there now?
So I've worked full-time like the entire time I've been on city council, which like it's stressful. It's like chaotic. It's hectic. And I mean, there's moments where it's like disheartening too, because there is so much to be done, like at the city, at the county level. And there really isn't ever enough time or energy to be able to address all of the things. And so like, that's something that I had to like struggle with is
Almost like triage.
well, and it just like recognizing that I will never have been able to do as much as maybe I would have like desired to do. Like, but leaving my term now, like, can I look myself in the mirror and just be like, I feel like I contributed meaningfully? Or like at the end of the day, in terms of like the calculus of the entire thing, do I feel like I added more benefits than like I did like negatives? And like, I feel pretty good about walking away from that perspective. I think we have a really good group of people that are working together that I think it's kind of like a rare situation where you have people who stepped up to say like, I feel like I can help lead this community. And so like that inherently, I think, requires a little bit of ego at least, to be able to be willing to put yourself in that situation. But through my experience on the council, like those egos don't take over. Like one of the things that I've really appreciated is like we really try to function as a council, in that once a decision is made, it's not like, hey, it's those 3 council members that voted for that, that's their decision. No, it's our decision. It's kind of like Walnut Lane was our responsibility, even though like it wasn't my council that purchased it. Like we take on, and like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to the community like who voted for what specifically. It's how does this impact my life? And so kind of like getting caught up and squabbling over those like little unnecessary nuances, like that's where people get lost, I think. And so but I think even with like the comfort like that we've developed in there, like things get lost as well. I think some of the
Like say, what do you mean by
well, I mean, I feel like there hasn't been a lot of drama and chaos and everything surrounding us. And so,
Yeah, city council meetings are boring.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the county ones.
Yeah. Like, but ultimately, like, I think any sort of entity that is dealing with as complex of matters as like the city council is can always benefit from having more eyes and more input on circumstances, because like particularly like I said, like we were beginning to function as a single council, and like I don't think we got to the point where like there was just we were single-minded in like our approach. There's still people coming from like a pretty diverse array of perspectives, but at the end of the day, it's 5 people. Like we're not going to like completely accurately represent the entire makeup of this diverse community.
Right.
And so like there are
Sometimes elected officials aren't necessarily the best representation.
no, absolutely not. Like but and like that's where like the blind spots arise from.
Right.
And I think there are always going to be blind spots when you're dealing with situations that are as complex or like as like integrated with one another as they are. Like these just incredibly complex systems. But the more perspectives that you can gain into it, the less blind spots you have, and like the more informed decisions that you can make. And ideally, you can try to get ahead of some potential pitfalls, because like a lot of things sound really great in like theory, but once they get put into practice, like into the real world, like the real world isn't this like perfectly like curated environment where everything goes according to plan every time.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Just messing with
Yeah, like unexpected collateral damage. Like I think that's a real thing that like, and I think like that's something that government as a whole is like susceptible to. Is we work for like a year on crafting some sort of legislation, we implement it, and then we move on to the next thing, but we don't necessarily always really get feedback as to like what the ultimate ramifications of that thing that we just spent a year working on are.
Right.
And that's where
Like a building reflection process.
not to the degree that I think would really benefit us. Because I think going back to the frequent turnover in government, like if we don't get back to some of those things that might not be working as ideally as we would have liked to, but are still fixable, I think the longer that we go without addressing them, the more institutional knowledge is lost, the more like people who are actually part of the decision-making process are no longer there to like be able to turn to. And so like at that point, you have to start working your way back. It becomes like a little bit of like a detective exercise. And at that point, like you are no longer using your resources as efficiently as possible. And I think like people really talk a lot about like the financial side of like city resources, but I think one of, if not the most important like city resource is its staff. Like there are so many different projects that we're trying to like work on in parallel, but we are limited in terms of like where we can actually get work done because we can only direct staff on like so many projects. And so when people see like the Walnut Lane situation, like there'd be gaps where the city wasn't working on Walnut Lane, but that's because like we have the rest of the city to take care of. And I mean, I don't think the community wants us to be able or to be at staffing levels where we are able to have dedicated staff to address every single issue in the community. Like at that point, I think like that becomes an unworkable situation, and like God, the expense of that. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a balancing act, but I know it's like, you know, like a lot of like highliners and stuff like that, where like there's feedback built into the system real time that lets you know like how well you're balancing that. Like that's not really available like at a government level like that.
Right.
Really, what is that is the community. And one of the things that I've like really been disheartened by is like when I stepped into council, and even when I was canvassing, and like sadly, like I'm still hearing this, is for the longest time it sounds like the council and the commission, or council back then as well, were primarily run by, if not like 5-0 or 7-0, like the progressive parts of our community. But we live in a community that's like 52-48 or something. And I think very validly, a lot of people felt as though like their voices or their perspective like weren't being heard or represented. And
Do you think we fall into that trap in the city? Like, what's the conservative voices in the city feel like?
so here's, and this is like something that I was going to try to tie into, is another complaint that we get along those lines is people feel that there are certain voices that have outsized influence within our community. And in a very real degree, that is true, but that is only true because they are the only voices that are speaking up. And so like, in terms of like my decision-making process as a council member, all I have access to is what the staff materials or the materials provided by staff, any sort of independent research that I can do, and then any sort of community engagement that like I receive. And so if I only have like the same 5 people reaching out to me about these issues, they are the only like community perspective that I receive. And so I think, and so kind of like going back to what I was saying to tie it back in is, I think very validly people may have tried to reach out to elected bodies that didn't represent them, even though they make up almost half of the community, and ultimately felt very dissuaded from trying to engage because what's the point? My voice isn't being heard. But I really tried to express like this willingness to hear, like, I want to know, like I don't have.
I think you need good sparring partners.
Absolutely. Well, and it's just like, we all have our like little fields of expertise as like council members. Like my expertise was like in the nonprofit sector. Like I don't have expertise in like infrastructure maintenance in terms of development, in terms of like running a commercial business or something like that. And so like
these non-financial needs that were like grave, like domestic violence, addiction, like those are.
Yeah, and like I'm willing to do like research and like engage in conversation, but there are people who are much more educated and like could have really offered me a greater degree of insight. But I mean, as a body, I think sometimes we carry the sins of like previous bodies. And it's hard because like the only way, I think a lot of people in this community have been fed lip service in one form or another. And so like the only way to, I think, prove to people that you're willing to be different is through action. But it's difficult when like the only way that I can show through action that I'm willing to listen requires you to step up and speak first. And that's where I think the city can do a much better job of being more proactive in engaging the community.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because, I mean, I've been to several of the community outreach things, and it's like, they're not well intended.
Yeah, well,
and it sucks, but they're trying to make it.
But no, I think
what is the public squares,
we can do better, because I think once again, like they are generally only held.
People where they're at. That's the thing.
Well, and that is my thing, is that we generally have these things like at this time, like at these times of the day, like for like this like period of time, and like that's not accessible to everybody in the community. And so I think we really need to be much more mindful in getting a much better understanding of the makeup of our community, and then figuring out how we can get to like those specific components, so that we can get a much more holistic perspective of. And I think like once we start doing that, like ideally more people will come out. Because I know it might not come off this way from like an outside perspective, but I can tell you like through like strategic planning like meetings and like one-on-one conversations that I have had with other council members is like, we want feedback. Like we are not always going to listen to what you're saying, like, but that doesn't mean that you were dismissed. Like, even though that might feel that way. But the more that we get to talk, like that knowledge can like traverse both ways, where I think like the city can do a lot better in terms of like educating people, but like we're not going to do that with like a Facebook post or like a flyer or something, like particularly when we're dealing with some like really nuanced topics. I think like that's where like you need kind of that face-to-face dialogue. And I think the face-to-face is really important because we see on Facebook that like once people like sit behind a keyboard, like I've interacted with some people online versus like in person, and like I would think they're two completely different people.
All right. Yeah, I wonder, social media has gotten this thing where it's the democratization of like,
Yeah.
I mean, it allows a lot more connections, but humans kind of suck sometimes, and like we're shitty at it. So,
Well, it's interesting. I was actually just listening.
Did you do a door-to-door campaign? I'm sorry. What
No. But it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, and like I thought this might be a good place to bring it up. But they brought up how every time there has been some sort of like transformation in the sharing of information, there have been some sort of like crazy revolutions, like from the printing press to like like fascism, like really spread in Europe, like because of radio. Like, but this is the first time ever in history where
we own the means of production.
yeah, where it is not controlled by a select few and kind of communicated down. It is communicated in every single direction, everywhere, all at once.
Some dummy with two microphones can put stuff.
I know. And who knows what that's gonna like, what kind of butterfly effect that's gonna have.
Yeah. Well, I just don't like. I think the thing is too is like you got 100. What's Twitter? 140 characters.
Yeah.
We were promised flying cars.
Yeah.
140 characters. I feel like talking to people in a longer form thing is like, oh well, yeah, like Luke isn't just a just some puppet of Sua.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, oh no, he actually, he's a genuinely concerned about that, and I think that's free speech. Like a lot of free speech can be the answer.
Yeah. But I think in like in healthy conditions, ideally.
Yeah.
I mean, who's to say like what that is? But it is like being face to face reminds you that you're talking to an actual human being, and not just like a bunch of characters that are popping up on a screen.
And I also think listening to experts for a long period of time helps as well. Like, oh, you're talking about the, whatever.
Yeah.
City sidewalks for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy actually, it's a complicated issue.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like on Facebook, like I would frequently get like, I don't want to say like flame, but like some flack, like, oh, here's Luke again with like another novel, like in terms of like a comment. But like these are really complicated issues, and I'm not just going to try to like bulldoze my way that like this is the correct way. Like I've tried to explain like this is a really complicated issue, and like these are the different like variables that I've tried to navigate like in terms of me making my decision. And I think like
you come from a base, like your base moral thing is like we can be like, Luke is a very moral based person, right? Like I would say like,
well, but it's a conscious thing. Like I absolutely have typed up some very mean-spirited things like in the message box, but then like, I don't know, particularly recognizing that as much as like it sometimes feels weird to say this, like over the past 4 years, I have been a community leader. And I think like for me, one of the things that makes a leader an effective leader is modeling the behavior that you expect others to like engage in. And so, yes, I'm still human. Like I get really upset at some of the takes that people have, but like it doesn't help to just like add to the ruckus, like and add to like the back and forth name calling. Like that really doesn't get us anywhere. Like if anything, it only like pushes us like further apart. Like and so.
Give you a good argument, argue better kind of thing.
Yeah, where just like, hey, like here are the actual like realities of the situation. Like I very frequently tried to just like cite facts as much as possible And if there was any sort of like assumptions being made, it was my own assumptions. I wasn't trying to assume what other people were doing, because at that point, like, I'm just imbuing people with whatever I like view the others as. And it just like doing what we can to step away from that otherizing, and like remembering like that we are a we, like we are a community, like we are a people that might experience things differently, but we're experiencing the same things. But like the diversity in that experience, like, is where the real wealth comes from. Like I support diversity, like kind of like all inclusively, but I think diversity of thought is one of the most important things out there. Like, because I don't know, particularly at a national level, and I think it's funneled down to a more local level, is we have these parties who think they are absolutely right on everything. But like, how arrogant is that? That like, I am correct on every single thing. Like, and I think like, one of the things that I have tried to be mindful of is, even when I think I'm 100% correct on something, like, don't be, like, leave that 1%. Because if I think I'm 100% correct on something, then like, why do I need to listen to anybody else? But like, that's how you manufacture permanent blind spots. And I think like in a lot of ways you stunt growth. You stunt like a lot of relationship building. And when we are dealing with those seemingly like dire circumstances, because I think there is like truth to like the haves and the have-nots, the winners and the losers, like in our local economy. Like, that's the reality of living in a resort community. Like, that is the economic structure that prevails frequently in these types of communities. And like, there are people.
We want everybody to be a winner, right? You can't be like, well, you could say,
Yeah.
yes, there's winners and losers, but it's like, well, we should, burn the winners down.
No,
like,
yeah.
Well, don't we want to like kind of
Yeah.
have a lot of winners? Can we tweak the edges of?
I mean, my entire thing, like, so Moab has opened up doors for me that I don't think have been like, would have necessarily been open for me anywhere else. And like, I'm very much of the mindset that like, this is a community that gave me so much. Like, I don't want to close the door behind me. I want to make sure that those doors are still open for others.
Yeah, what do you think that was? What were some of those things you feel like it gave you?
I mean, just like in terms of like growth, like professionally, like being able to like step up. I mean, I don't know that I would have necessarily been elected anywhere else that I have lived or anything like that.
Every time I like go visit someplace else, I'm like, man, I need to go. I gotta go back to my hometown in Moab.
Yeah.
Like, we're just kind of all a little bit weird in our own ways, and like I've gotten, I just have had a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
Myself.
Well, and like, I don't know that I would have had like the diversity of relationships that I do out here. Like,
we do have strong community in weird ways. Like,
well, and I think we absolutely do. And I think like that really comes out in like times of emergency. Like when, like I did one of the sweat equity homes next to Cinema Courts. And like when the Cinema Courts fire was happening, I remember driving into my neighborhood and just seeing like a flood of people like walking with like hoses, pickaxes, shovels coming in. Like, and I've seen that happen over and over again. Is like when somebody in our community needs help, like all pretenses are dropped. Like my family just went through like a really difficult situation with our kid. And like, we opened up a GoFundMe just to like kind of help us out. And like some of the first people that donated are some of the people that like you would think hate me in this community. But like, yes, I have differing opinions with some of those people. But like one of the things that I really try to stay mindful of is those people are passionate about this community. Like they aren't doing this necessarily out of malice, or at least I hope they're not. But I also think people wouldn't put themselves in positions to receive as much flack and hate as they do if they weren't passionate, if they didn't care about these things. And so like, that's where I really wish people could just take a step back, kind of out of the fire.
You're nodding to your enemies, and your enemies should nod to you.
Yeah. Where it's just like, imagine if we could channel like all of the energy and time that has gone into like just name calling one another on Facebook into like collectively working together on addressing some needs. Like, yes, they're not. And I think like what is difficult is kind of going back to national politics, like feeding down to a local level, is that this like all or nothing mentality has like become really pervasive, where it's I either get everything that I want, like, or nothing. But we see what that leads to more often. It leads to nothing, like aside maybe some more chaos along the way. And so things like stall out and we don't really make meaningful progress. But even if we get everything that we want, kind of going back to things are great in theory, but like reality doesn't necessarily adhere to like the rules of theory. And so like there are going to be things that need to be fixed. Like there are going to be issues, and that's where having kind of that like an openly collaborative, like participative process, yes, it can be contentious, but like I think that debate is good as long as it is done with like a clear like goal in mind of like moving this forward, like, and making sure that we are trying to like look at the situation from every which way that we can, knowing that we're still going to have blind spots even with that mentality, rather than just I win so that other, like if I win they lose, like, because like that mentality only like grows those divides. And I think like that's where we lose sight of just how strong fundamentally. I think this is something that I like realized when I was canvassing, where because of Moab's physical isolation from everything, I think Moab in its blood like has had to be a community where like we need to just drop our bullshit sometimes, because like there's nobody else out there to take care of us aside from ourselves. And so I think kind of like leveraging some of those, at least from my perspective, because like I don't have like the long history here as many others do, but from what I'm seeing is like very likely just like foundational like roots or like DNA to what Moab has been and continues to be as a community, is like a recognition that like when we rely on one another and work together, like that is when like our strength really truly arises.
Yeah. Well, that's you're handing off the baton kind of to Miles.
Yeah.
Like Miles has a lot different. I mean, I don't think there's anything he would like disagree with you on. Kind of like he just is coming from a lot different perspective.
And I think that's
from
great.
The realm,
Yeah.
It's scrappy. He's trying to build his own business. He's trying to he's trying to buy a house.
Yeah.
That's like crazy amount of money because he doesn't fall in this missing middle thing. So anyways, what's some things you pass on to him for?
In terms of just like long-term sustainability, is find a group of friends that are going to be okay with you making decisions that they don't agree with. Like that trust that you.
He does that every day with me.
Yeah. Well, so he's got a good start, but I mean, you are going to have people questioning your morals, like your integrity and all of that. And like you are going to be making consequential decisions, and sometimes those consequences aren't going to be great. And so the people that can remind you and keep you to try to stay as true to like what made him want to run in the first place. Because it's really easy to get caught up in kind of like all the muck of like government. And like that mud covers you up, and it kind of covers up a lot of those things that initially drove you. I think, sometimes it's a good thing because it forces you to be a little bit more pragmatic, but some of the fire that comes with wanting to run is also kind of like the fire that sparks creativity and some like creative solutions to what we've seen as like intractable problems for so long.
Yeah, no, cool. You know, any other, you know, we're going to do this as our last segment here. You got any other closing thoughts or questions for me kind of thing? Or what? The floor is yours.
Floor is mine. I don't know. I guess this is like a little bit of a goodbye from like this side of like the dais, I guess. Yeah. And I keep going back to things like when I was canvassing, but I had a very...
Is that mostly because of having a kid? Is that like 100% like...
Yeah.
It's just a time factor.
Yeah. I want to be like a present father. Like I lost my father earlier this year, and like when we moved to the US, like he worked his ass off like to like get my family into like a corner of a community that we could afford that was in like a really good school district in the suburbs. And like there was times where like I appreciate how much work he put in and time and effort he put in into like providing that for our family, but I also like wish I could have spent some more time with him.
Gee, Dad, I didn't know need those Air Jordans.
Yeah. But and so like I want to be that. And I mean just like having like worked full time and done this and even like planning our wedding, like I was barely like walking. I think like doing all three with like a young baby, let alone like what happened with our family, like I'd be in the grave already. But it was a very difficult decision. Like it was like literally to the last like filing day, I was like, I knew I wasn't going to run, but like there's so many reasons why I wanted to run too.
I mean, what a valid reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it was one of those, like, I'm very good at kind of like arguing what I ultimately want to be the thing, like the outcome internally. But like, that's one of those things where I can't really argue against. But I'm appreciative. I mean, being an immigrant to this country and everything, and having this community that has given me so much that I really fell in love with, like put its trust in me to like kind of take the reins for a little bit, or at least put a hand on the reins with a group of other people, like is really meaningful. And like, I don't know, in a lot of ways where America is changing, like I started kind of like losing a little bit of like that sense of like the American dream, but that really reignited it for me. And like reminded me that, I know it's kind of just like being in like the NICU when we were for 50 days, like those nurses were angels. And it was such a good reminder that there are a lot of really fantastic people in the world. Because going back to these kind of like algorithmically driven like news feeds that we have, like they feed us the worst parts of humanity because like that is what drives engagement. Like that was something that like I needed to like really be mindful of, like working at Sea Haven, is that like I have voluntarily chosen to put myself into a friction point of society. And so I am seeing some of the ugliest parts of humanity, but this is not an accurate reflection of humanity at large. Like the one difference here is that we aren't necessarily making this decision consciously. It is being thrust upon us. And so I think going out into the community and talking, like knocking on doors and talking with people, like I didn't have any like really contentious like interactions. Like it really was just a bunch of people who cared about their community. And it was like a good reminder that like we need to go out and like touch grass and talk to people to remember what reality actually is, because a lot of what we engage in on a day-to-day basis isn't real. Like, I mean, it is, but it's not a holistic reflection of reality. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
see that accurate description of reality.
Yeah, but I mean, like, thanks for like letting me drop into your little bubble of like alternate reality. Or
Right. Well, the long form interview. That's what I feel like. I listen. I'm a working man. I listen to podcasts all day.
yeah,
And you were telling me you're a fan of podcasts
Oh, yeah.
too. And it's just such a I have space in my life to listen to somebody speak for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It may just be about like Lex Friedman talking about nuclear fission with somebody that has no bearing on me, but I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting. So I just think, I'm like, wow, we could do, to me, I'm just like, oh, it's really fascinating talking to everybody. And I hope I've gotten a lot of feedback for this, by the way. Like, thanks, keep coming. I like the suggestions people throw at me. And so, yeah.
Actually, I'm going to go on the camera
Uh-oh.
because I have an announcement.
Oh boy.
This has been coming for a while. There is.
What are we doing?
If you, as a viewer of Shop Talk, want to leave us a voicemail, this is what Luke suggested, and I put this in the description of the video. In the description of the video on YouTube, there is a phone number. If you call it, it'll go straight to voicemail, and you'll hear my voice. You can then leave a voicemail. I will see it, and then I will include it for the next guests that make sense to react to it, for them to react to it. So if you the viewer, want to be involved with Shop Talk, leave a message at the phone number below in the description where it says leave a message for Shop Talk.
All right.
And that's
there
that.
you go. So.
Awesome.